Welcome back, Tribe. We're here today with Dr. Brandt Smith, and today we are going to be discussing the psychology and the sociology of warrior rituals, oaths, and rites of passage. We're going to be looking at what these things mean to a warrior society and what place they have or don't have in our society today. Dr. Smith, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you, brother?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to speaking to you on this subject. It's definitely something that needs some attention. So happy to be here with you and happy to get started. So, Dr. Smith, let's start out someplace. Let's start from the historical perspective. And, we mentioned that we're going to be talking about rituals, oaths, and rites of passage. And let's go ahead and get started with the rites of passage. And give us a little bit of historical context about rites of passage, what their role was in earlier forms of society, and what was meant to be accomplished with that rite of passage.
Well, a rite of passage, I could probably get some of my anthropology colleagues in here, and they would write you a dissertation on it. But I'll give you the Cliff Notes version, if you don't mind. A rite of passage was meant to be in one aspect, it was meant to be a dividing line between child and adult. That one day you got to, screw around, do kid stuff, and then the next day the adults grab you, you were put through a rite of passage, and then you were an adult and you were expected to behave that way by everybody. I mean, you were grown. You were a grown man or a grown woman, and you had responsibilities to your tribe, to your society, and you had to do those. We have other rites of passage. We have them in school, where you graduate elementary school, now you're in middle school. Or you graduate middle school, and now you're in high school. Or you graduate high school, and now you get to go to college. And there's different roles. There's different schemas that you're supposed to live up to, when you go into those. And I think they're very important for a society because children really need adults, because the world's a big, scary place, and adults make the world a little bit smaller. It's kind of like when your mom used to cut up your meat, put it down to more small, manageable bites for you, and then one day you can handle your own knife, figure it out on your own, don't choke. The rites of passage, they were designed to be able to bring people along, either in society or within a trade. I mean, if you were a carpenter, you'd start out as an apprentice. You do all the crap work, all the old guys yell at you, but then they teach you things. And then one day you go from apprentice to being a journeyman, and you become respected in your trade. And one day, if you ever get good enough, you're a master craftsman. And then you get your own apprentices that you get to yell at. And so the craft perpetuates then, right? We look at it in martial arts. It's like even under the traditional Jigoro Kano belt system type of thing. You get your white belt. You don't know anything. You don't know jack. You learn a couple of throws, a couple of pins. Once you get those, you get promoted up to your yellow belt. That's a rite of passage. And you get to learn some more things, and then one day, hard work, eventually you work up to black belt. And then the real learning begins. Well, you know what I'm talking about. Most of your listeners will know what you're talking about, too. Then the real learning begins. And, it gets down to the idea that mastery is a process. A rite of passage prepares you for it. Mastery of a craft, mastery of an art, mastery of life. Everybody should read the Book of 9 Rings. Or 5 Rings, sorry. Book of 5 Rings specifically for the 9 principles of mastery. So everybody should run out and read that right now. There's some great translations out there. That's a rite of passage.
And Dr. Smith, tell me, because I think in modern American culture, and it may be this way in other countries in Europe and out in the East as well, but especially in the United States, there's definitely a feeling that a lot of those rites of passage may need to be taking place on a more personal level than a societal level.
I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, people have their own rites of passage. Like a friend of mine recently beat cancer. that's a certain rite of passage if you want to extend the definition that far. I mean, it really changes you.
Right.
I went through it myself, but I think that we are doing our young people a real disservice when we are not making it very clear to them where the dividing lines are. Like you're no longer a child. Now be an adult. Now we tell somebody, oh, you're 18, you can do all these things, but we're not going to trust you with anything. And, I think we're doing them a real disservice because it's confusing to them. It's really confusing to them. It's like you can't spank a kid half of the time when he's doing something wrong. It's confusing. They don't know where the lines are. They don't know where the rules are. They look to the elders in the community, the older folk, to teach them. We're falling down on the job. That's my opinion. I think that we should have those clear societal rites of passage. On a very personal level, it's really hard to determine what would be a rite of passage. And it's not a check sheet where you can check off some boxes.
Right, and that's where I was going with the question. Is that from my perspective, it seems like, if you are going to go through a rite of passage, it's going to be something like your example of your friend that beat cancer. It's on a personal level.
Yeah.
But there are not that many organizations anymore or institutions in the United States where people go through rite of passage. I mean, one that I can think of, one exception, and I hear this a lot, and you can maybe share, your thoughts on it, being somebody that's been there and done it. But military, joining the armed forces, going through boot camp. I have heard many times individuals say, yeah, you know what, the Army or the Navy, made a man out of me, and I went in a kid and I came out a man. That's an example of an institution that is administering this rite of passage to, all the people that are coming through its doors. And it seems to give a very positive, effect and a benefit to the individual and to the organization when they do this. Tell me about the military. You've been there. You've been down that road. Tell me what that rite of passage is like.
Well, the military actually saved my life, but that's a story for another time. That's one of those two-beer discussions. But it really did save my life. It completely changed who I was and how I behaved in the world, which is a good thing because I was a really screwed-up kid. But it's done the same for a lot of people. And, part of it is knowing that you can be part of something bigger than yourself, and it's not Little League. It's not something that your dad did. It's not something that your mom did. It's not something that they put you in. It's something that you chose to step up. And that oath of enlistment, it rolls over you really strong, and it sticks to people. I know people that have been out of the military for 30 or 40 years, and their political ideology is to uphold and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I mean, it goes that deeply into them. And I know a lot of veterans, because, I'm in the American Legion. I know a lot of veterans are getting really tired and a little offended by that, quick little cute phrase, oh, thank you for your service. I'm like, thank me, hell. I did it for you, and I'd do it again. There's no reason to thank me. It's something that they thought that they were supposed to do. They're getting a little offended by it because it's becoming so trite. It almost diminishes the value of it. But yeah, it is a rite of passage, but the military is also a very traditional organization still. They're a very sentimental organization. They keep like little pieces of an aircraft from World War II in the squad room. It's that big. They remember these things. It's almost kind of like a football team, a high school football team that keeps an old deflated ball from when they were the state champions 30 years ago. It's like these traditions matter. And I think that's the problem with our lack of rites of passage, to get back to the oaths, is we're starting to lose our respect for traditions. And I think the martial arts is a good avenue for rites of passage and for, giving people a bridge. I think it's really good. I think it's Well, I encourage it, especially for all young people, all kids out there. I think that they should be studying, and I think they should be in martial arts, taekwondo class, something. Give them a direction and some type of structure. Little league is really good for that too. Football, baseball, basketball, soccer, whichever. It's important to have kids involved. When you and I were kids, there was a couple of kids that might have been overweight in your neighborhood, but not many. But then again, Atari was still kind of cool. And we didn't have Game Boy. It's like we were always outside. And my parents didn't know where I was half the time. Probably more than half the time, because I spent a lot of time trying to make sure they didn't know where I was. But they knew I could handle most situations, and if I couldn't, they knew I'd run. But then again, all the neighbors were also keeping an eye on us too,
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so it's the rites of passage. They are important to the, I guess, the stability of a community. Is that, I don't know if that's really the appropriate way to phrase it, but it makes it very clear. It also brings a community together. Those oaths. Jim Keating, I think he's a great man. He said there's 3 obligations that somebody has to make in the world. The first is to themselves, where they decide to make themselves a better person. And the second is an obligation to their community, to try to make at least their neighborhood, the world that they live in, a better place. And their third obligation was to death, to really understand that you were mortal and that you were going to die. And when you accepted that, almost very Buddha, that when you accept it, death is no longer a weapon that can be used against you, but it becomes your best friend and your best advisor. I read that from Jim Keating way back in the early 90s, and it stuck with me. And Master-at-Arms James A. Keating, I don't know if you've read up on him or any of your listeners have, check him out. He's got some remarkable stuff. And Pete Couts is affiliated with him. You've talked to Dwight McLemore, and Colonel McLemore is awesome. You were lucky to get a chance to sit down and talk with him. But Jim Keating here, he's deep. He's deep. I learned some things just by reading what he wrote. But that gets into the oaths. These oaths have meaning. And people should pay attention to them. I think we should bring them back.
Now, a lot of people are involved with cultures, subcultures that do have some type of oath, and I guess this will lead us into, rituals, especially rituals of initiation. But starting at the oath, because if in most initiatory systems, there's going to be some form of an oath. I think the common person may look at that as kind of hokey, may look at that as kind of archaic, or something that has no place in modern society. But I want to get your thoughts on it. I think that there's a certain resonance when these things are very, very clearly stated, where the goals, for your behavior are very clear, and just being able to speak them out loud. I think just speaking aloud is something very powerful in and of itself. What are your thoughts on that? How do you view the role of oaths in developing, a warrior?
Well, it's these oaths in relation to these rituals of initiation. Because initiation, that's a beginning. You initiate something, right? You start something. And these rituals of initiation, that goes very strongly with rites of passage, too. It's like you're being brought along. You are starting something big. And you said something that really caught my ear, and I'm going to go ahead and say something really, really unpopular, and maybe I'll piss off a couple people. If not, well, better luck next time. But, yeah, the common people might find them to be hokey. I endeavor to not be common. And I know you don't. And I know a lot of your listeners that listen to these podcasts, they don't either. Why would you want to be common? And if the common people don't understand the importance of it, or or they reject the importance of it, that might be precisely why they're common.
Very good point. I mean, you're putting it in perspective for sure. So what do you think is the key lesson or the key goal that is achieved by taking these oaths?
These oaths, these rituals of initiation, and sometimes just the common ritual. I mean, most of us starting in the martial arts, we started off in a commercial karate or judo or taekwondo school because that's what was available and it's what our parents could afford. But that ritual of putting on the gi, of tying the belt, stepping out to the mat and bowing in the mat and, lining up for the sensei. Those rituals told us that we were no longer in the profane world. We were in a sacred space, and I use that very broadly. But we were in a sacred space where we were supposed to do it. Those daily rituals are important as well. Just the idea of putting on the gi, tying the belt. Over on my side of martial arts, where I'm like, show up in jeans and a T-shirt, I don't care. Maybe I threw away something important too. Maybe I did, and I should probably spend some time thinking about it. I'm not going to tell everybody they got to wear a sarong or anything like that, or an ikat, but maybe there's something important to it, because then you know that at least at this time you are in a different space. So those daily rituals. You're in the military. You go on, you do your PT, you do your chanting. And a bunch of GIs singing off key. These things aren't important. I remember being in the service, and I'd spend time every night getting my uniform ready for tomorrow, before I went to sleep. Make sure everything was sharp. Make sure everything was put together correctly. These were all daily rituals as well that go along with it. Attention to detail, integrity. That was shown by how I wore the uniform. I know a lot of people that you and I both know that are probably going to hear this, and they were all in the service, or they were police officers, and all of them probably started, as I said, probably in a commercial karate, taekwondo school. Not to demean them, they do great things, and we need more of them. We need more, and they're not paid enough. That the sheer act of putting on that gi, man, that's a ritual by itself. Some schools are more deeply into the ritual than others. I don't know which is right, it's wrong. How light do you go on it? How heavy do you go on it? I don't know. That's up for the individual instructor. That's up for the individual organization to figure out. But I think they're vitally important for preparing the mind to learn. Now, we look at certain esoteric organizations. Their rituals of initiation are actually designed to shock you, to let you know that you're no longer just out there in the world. You're in a different place. It prepares you to learn. I mean, that's what I think is its purpose. If anybody that listens to it is interested, just drop a note on Vargas's Facebook page there, and I can recommend a couple of good books. There's some really, really good ones just on the ideas of initiation that would be really cool for you to read if you're interested in that. But they're very broad, they're very involved, so be ready to spend some time reading them.
Now, Dr. Smith, just touching on the oaths a little bit before we move on with the initiations. A good example that comes to mind, I often, have to discipline my kids. I have to remind them constantly. And my wife, or myself, will kind of get frustrated from time to time and say, well, when are they going to learn? Why don't they get this? We're constantly telling them. And then I'll either tell my wife or my wife will tell me, we just keep telling them. And then one day it's just going to be there. It's going to be ingrained. And the light bulb will go off, and then they're going to be able to understand that lesson. And I recall, like Temple Karate schools. And a lot of karate schools will do this, but they come in and they start class, they'll bow in, they'll do the ritual of the class, and they bow in and they say a small oath. I think everybody's probably heard it. I come to you with empty hands, that type of oath.
Yeah.
What role do you think that that constant reaffirmation, constantly repeating these words out loud, is it a form of mental programming? Is it instilling that on a deeper level? I mean, from a psychologist's point of view, what's going on there?
Well, as a psychologist and as a martial artist, I'm going to say I really don't like the word programming. I like to think of it a little bit more as inculcation. There are values, there are characteristics that we want to instill. And, repetition. And, when you think about kids, because there's a lot of kids in karate and taekwondo courses all over the country, which is awesome. I wish there was more. But that idea of inculcation and the repetition, the human brain isn't done developing as far as the physical structure is concerned until around age 25. That's when the frontal lobe is more developed. And the frontal lobe is responsible for a whole lot of the executive control, being able to control your emotions, stop, think, don't lash out. That's why I rarely throw temper tantrums in the middle of Kmart anymore. And if I do, I'm doing it very purposefully. But this repetition, and everybody learns by repetition. Repetition's the mother of skill. And I would say it's probably the mother of inculcating ideas and values. I messed up a lot as a kid. I said I screwed up. It took, and some people that know me well might be a little shocked. They're like, "Hey, Brandt, you got spanked all the time?" No way. It happened. Then one day it just stopped because I moved out. And I got spanked in other ways by non-commissioned officers. But it's a constant learning process, and it's part of that inculcation of those values. And then one day I find myself being the person that is inculcating those values. The lesson will be repeated until you learn it. And it's vitally important that those of us that can teach, do teach. Because it perpetuates the society, it perpetuates an art or a skill or a craft, and it keeps it going. And so what we do in the martial arts, man, we're keeping alive these beautiful traditions, these beautiful skills. But we're also keeping alive this culture of independence and self-sufficiency. And that's really important. That might be the most important thing that we do.
Now, Dr. Smith, looking at the initiations, and you touched on it briefly earlier, one of the things that I've identified as being really important, to pull away from that, process. You and I have talked, several times about this idea as far as service. Service to others is probably the most noble thing that somebody can do. I ascribe to the idea that a warrior is first and foremost a servant. I saw a really great quote somewhere. I can't remember who it was attributed to, but it basically said, self-defense is about protecting yourself, and warriorship is about protecting others. And that, in and of itself, is defining, role of servitude, service to others.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is really important that I've taken away from looking at these kind of initiations, this type of ritual, is that you become something more than yourself. You become part of something greater than yourself. And when you do that, it facilitates that role of servant. If you're by yourself, if you're solitary, there's no need to serve anybody. And by doing this, you're basically on the hook. Now I'm part of a community. I'm responsible for other people now. I don't have a way out of it. I can't, skirt that responsibility. Do you feel, what are your thoughts on that? How do you view that as a benefit from taking an initiation and taking an oath and becoming part of something greater than yourself?
At the most basic level, taking responsibility for something outside of yourself, serving, as you say, is at least for a second, at least while you're doing that, it gets you over yourself for a second. You get over your ego for a little bit. You put somebody else ahead of you. So it's you have to submerge your own ego at least for a second. And that's a good thing, because if you think about fights with your spouse or a boyfriend, girlfriend, with friends or anything, you can see most of it is because you decided to plant your head firmly up your posterior and refuse to listen to somebody else. Creates conflict. If we can get over ourselves and not be so egotistical, it's a lot easier to be able to talk to other people, to hear their point of view. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. Maybe neither one of you are right. My good friend, my colleague, Jay Carstensen, I don't know if you've ever gotten the chance to meet him. He passed away a few years ago after a battle with cancer. He was a master of this. He was able to sit back, put his ego aside, and listen to people. He was really good at it. I wish I was better at it. But Jay is great at it. Terry Trahan, who's running KSMA now, he is freaking awesome at it. And at least at that level, it's good for people. And, that's just not even talking about the good that it does for society if you go and volunteer at a soup kitchen or something like that. I mean, that's good. People benefit, but the individual benefits from it as well. And I think people should remember that when they elect to serve, that they benefit from it too. It actually makes them a better person, not just in the eyes of the community, like, oh, he's great, he volunteers at a soup kitchen. Is you have set your own ego aside and done something for somebody else. I mean, we should all endeavor to do that at least once a day. Just do something for somebody else for no hope of reward or anything like that. But it just makes you a better person because you get to set your own ego aside. You think about martial arts students, we've all had that problematic one who already knows it all. Getting it through their thick skull that they don't is the toughest thing ever. They need to get over their own ego, shut up so they can learn. And, well, I think we might all be guilty of that particular sin. That's my opinion on the value of service, is it makes you a better person. And if we all do it, we all become better people. So then, well, hell, all of society benefits. Because if we're all better people, it's all a better place.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Smith, for the person that's out there, the person that's listening to this podcast that has that inkling to, aspire to warriorship, maybe they're firmly rooted on the path, maybe they're just kind of figuring out that there is a path. What do you recommend? What do you recommend for them to get the most out of their experience? Keeping in mind that we're talking about, the rites of passage, the ritual, behaviors, the oaths. What are some of the things that they should seek out? Not necessarily any particular group, but if they're out there and they want to do this, what are the steps for them?
Well, let me. You're asking for my recommendations, so these are my personal opinions. First, I would let me address it broadly, and then I'll get a little bit more narrow. I would say you do exactly what Master-at-Arms James Keating said. First make that commitment to yourself. Don't lie to yourself. Do not think dishonestly, which is the first of the 9 principles of mastery from the Book of 5 Rings. Do not think dishonestly. Know it. Commit to yourself. And no one's going to be able to check you on it because it's a commitment to yourself. So you have to be really honest with yourself. Brutal self-honesty. To be a better person in all ways, not just in one ways. And for that, remember what the samurai did. They didn't have to only be good at horsemanship and sword and bow. They also had to do poetry, flower arranging, origami, the arts. Musashi in the Book of Five Rings said, "Know the ways of all arts. Be acquainted with the ways of all professions." And under today's parlance, I'd say that would be experience new things. Read a lot on any subject you can find. Educate yourself. You don't have to go to a formal school and go pick up a bunch of degrees or anything like that, or a silly little PhD, but educate yourself. Public libraries are still free, unless you can't get a book back on time. And Google, it provides a bunch of information. Too bad people don't make good use of it. I just look up cat videos, but that's me. Make good use of it. Educate oneself. Make yourself a better person. And if you're so inclined, do something for people that are less fortunate. Help out in the world. Don't be a cancer on the earth. And then, from that, it naturally goes that you need to make a commitment then to make your community a better place. Keep your lawn up. Don't throw trash around. Just be nice to people in the grocery store. Don't text and drive. I want to repeat that. Don't text and drive, you damn morons. Nothing typed with your thumbs is worth anything like that. Don't do it. It kills people. And if you think that it's okay to not look at the road when you're driving at 60 miles per hour, you're an idiot. You shouldn't have a license or a phone. Off my soapbox. If you can't do anything, you lack the power, the money, the means, or whatever to be able to make your community a better place, at least you can not make it a worse place. If you catch my drift on that. And then you need to spend a lot of time in contemplation and know that we're mortal and life is short and it's all too damn valuable. Spend it wisely. I've been flat broke before, and I always got more money. You spend time, it's gone. Spend it wisely. Spend it in good endeavors, always, at the best you can. Make the best out of the short time that you have as possible. Now, ways to get that, I always recommend martial arts training to everybody. Everybody. And if you can't do like a formal, silat or karate or something of that nature, go take some shooting lessons. Go learn archery. Take up fencing. Do something. But don't let it absorb your life. Always remember to go fishing, which is also code for sitting on the dock, drinking beer, watching a bobber. Learn to enjoy the little things. I know that you're a proponent of finding wisdom where you can get it, and off of movies. The movie The Last Samurai. Right at the end, where the last samurai were getting gunned down by the modern weapons, and that one older samurai that Tom Cruise's character was hanging out with was going to commit seppuku, but his opinion was the nice leaves blowing through the air, perfect. Enjoy it all the way up to the very end. Squeeze the most out of it. And try to remember that you are not alone in the world. Yeah, you're not alone in the world. There's other people on the journey too. Sometimes there are people you can reach out to and be friends with, but if you can't, at least know that they're a person that is trying to evolve as well. Siddhartha said everybody is trying to express their Buddha nature. And you run into a problem. This person's going through insecure phases. It's an opportunity. You can exercise patience and compassion, or you can escalate the situation and make it worse when it never really had to be. And so those alone, get training. I never talk about this connection between mind, body, and spirit because I don't think they're different. I think you improve one, you improve the other. And so people should do these things. Educate yourselves, intellectually, emotionally, and just the sheer enjoyment of life. People should do that. Have fun with it. And never get involved in any martial arts training that just absorbs your life and takes over your life. That's stupid. That's unbalanced. People shouldn't do that. They have to make time for their families, for themselves. They shouldn't impoverish themselves over it. That's where I think the keys of warriorship are. Is you're able to achieve this servant personal development balance without hurting either one. I mean, should you give so much charity? Should you give charity? Yeah. Should you give so much that your own family starves? It's nutty. And then that puts you impoverished, so somebody else has to take care of you. That's no good. That doesn't help the problem. It might be even better to stay very aware and maybe eliminate the problem so nobody has to give charity. That would be cool too. And then one day a leopard might take off its spots. The world can be a rough place. But be aware of it. But be aware that the world can be pretty damn cool too.
Well, Dr. Smith, definitely some great advice. I want to thank you for coming back on the show and discussing the rituals of warriorship with us.
Any time at all.
Excellent. So, sir, thank you again very much, and hopefully we'll get you back on real soon to talk about some other topics. As always, a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Have a good night.